Welcome again to this week's Beanstalk DAO meeting. Appreciate everybody joining us. Should be a good meeting. We will kick things off as we usually do. I've got the deck that'll pull up here just in a second. And as always, happy to take questions as they come up, either from folks in the audience or folks asking through the chat. I'll be doing my best to keep an eye on both the Barnyard chat and the chat for this specific voice channel. But if I miss something, as always, feel free to jump in and let me know. So with that, I will share my screen. All right. Yep. Somebody's unmuted with some background noise. All right. Sounds like it's gone. Okay. So big items up front. So as we've been talking about for the last couple of weeks, Beanstalk 3 is currently in its remediation phase. Have a little bit more information on that a little bit later on in the presentation. The other thing that we're discussing, and it's come up over the last week or so, is the fork migration system. So this is a system that is being built out by Beanstalk Farms to, let's say, to potentially facilitate some movement between these the forks that are currently being discussed or under development. And again, willing to take questions on any of those items as they come up. Sounds like someone's off. All right, back in. So I think we'll have more information on the fork migration system that's under development over the coming weeks. I wanted to get that into the deck now so that the DAO is aware. All right, jump down into projects and initiatives. So this slide's been reworked just a little bit to add a little bit more clarity around kind of how projects move through this process. So what we've done is basically taken the items that are in development before they had actually been pulled off this funnel chart and they just appeared as Gantt charts. We've got them still on so that everything's kind of all in one place. So, not a whole lot of change in a lot of the items that are here. Up above the funnel, we've got pretty much the same group of potential projects that have been discussed or currently being discussed by the community. In the top and let's say middle of the funnel, which will be the middle of the funnel, we've got liquid stock and seeds, external yield distribution, and blacklist mitigation, and then down and then active development component. Again, stuff that we either have a current Gantt chart for, we'll have one in the near future. We've got Beanstalk 3 and the fork migration system. All right, so watching the chat. So first question that I see is, and actually, Nasdaq, I'll come back up to your questions as well. Actually, you know what? I will do that now because probably now is as good of a time as any to start asking questions and start to work through the ones we have. So Nasdaq asks, if one main goal of forks is to get rid of unripe, and in parentheses, Nasdaq says, can't migrate to the new system. Why don't you just get a set time for chopping to end? Or I'm sorry, why don't you just set a time for chopping to end? When the date is reached, anyone who hasn't chopped gets the chop rate from, I'm going to interpret this as saying, get the chop rate from when the countdown began. I guess, admittedly, I don't have an immediate answer to that. As just an observer, I would say that creating additional complexity around the chop process probably isn't the right approach at this point.
Can I hop in?
Absolutely.
Ciao. So I see Nasdaq also has to give a general spiel on the fork system, which I guess I can do, but wanted to affect a specific question. He says one of the main goals is to get rid of unripe. If one of the main goals is to get rid of unripe, why not just give a set time for chopping to end? Honestly, I think your idea is very interesting now. From the perspective of that would sort of create a race such that everyone would have to chop, or sort of there's this game of chicken, which would probably have some weird, it's definitely a funky game to play. But I kind of want to take a step back and just, the main goal of the fork system has nothing to do with unripe or getting rid of unripe in particular. Since the governance exploit over 2 years ago, there's been a big open question with respect to Beanstalk governance. Like, what would it look like to move back to an actual decentralized version of governance? And I think kind of goes without saying, but the lengths that we went initially to try to make Beanstalk decentralized and really adhere to the values of the space are directly undermined by the fact that now the system is exclusively governed by a multi-sig. And you could say that even before the hack, because there was a multi-sig, that this was still the case. To me, it's quite substantively different. And the big open question becomes, well, given that the system is not at a place where it can just be left alone in perpetuity, or at least I certainly don't think so. Given that we likely will need to be able to continue to upgrade Beanstalk, and I use the royal we here, like the Beanstalk community, if we need to continue to make improvements to the model, is there a way to do it where Beanstalk is both a smart contract and has some sort of permissionless governance system? And when it comes to the permissionless governance system, what type of properties does that system have? And in short, the crux of the issue comes from the fact that Beanstalk as a contract holds value. And accordingly, basically, the governance of the contracts that hold the value can sort of do arbitrary things with that value, which is in practice exactly what happened with the exploit, where someone took control of the contracts and was able to arbitrarily extract value from the system. And this can even potentially be a minority in certain instances exercising control over the majority or the potential majority that want to make certain changes, where the minority says no changes can be made. And this was the problem that Beanstalk has found itself teetering quite close to over the past 9 months, 12 months, where it's been exceedingly and increasingly difficult for BIPs to pass, even when it seems like there's no real pushback from any active participants in the community to, that the BIP shouldn't pass. It's just simply that there's not enough voter participation. And then you would say, well, maybe just lower the quorum to participants, or lower the quorum based on historical participation, might be better to say. But the problem there is that now you get into a system where, like, it's quite easy to make changes, and you have a circumstance where users that onboarded to a particular version of the system now sort of have the software changed out from under them, and they don't like the properties that they're getting anymore. And it's one of those things where voting to make omnibus changes or unilateral changes to the system for all participants seems to have quite undesirable properties when compared to a system like Bitcoin, where it's quite a relatively simple process to make changes to the Bitcoin software that are backwards compatible. But when it comes to changes to the software that are not, it requires a hard fork. And what this does is it creates really interesting properties for the users, where basically the version of the software that they opt into, they're more or less guaranteed. Of course, you could have a social fork where in practice that's not really the case, but you have much higher guarantees or much better guarantees that your value will still be in the same system where you left it. And so just from a fundamental perspective, in my opinion, the fork system has much less to do with the current Beanstalk, or really anything to do with the current Beanstalk, other than this is a proposal to the governance solution. And from my perspective, it's quite an elegant solution to the governance problem, because you actually now get a lot of really nice additional properties beyond the one that I just described, where basically any participant in the system that wants to try out new rules, they no longer need the support of the majority to test out those rules. They can simply run the test. And the reason to formalize the fork migration system into something in the current Beanstalk is that this could potentially allow for really simple transfers of value from the existing version that any one participant is using to a newer version of Beanstalk. So it's like ultimately, it seems potentially negative for both Beanstalks, assuming we just have two, that the only way to go from one to the other is to sell from one and buy in the other, as opposed to being able to just migrate where you burn from one and then it mints in the other. It's much less adversarial. And so there's some idea of, on the one hand, there's this now much greater ability to innovate and attempt to improve the system with a really low friction and low danger way for the two beanstalks to sort of respect and honor each other. And therefore, and there's a lot more to say on the fork system and some of the positive externalities, but just to answer your question about like the goal is to get rid of unripe. In fact, one of the only problems, the biggest problem, I think by far, with the fork migration system as it's currently designed is that because there's no way for the old beanstalk to verify that the new beanstalk is honoring the chop rate, then it like there's no way for the old beanstalk to know that once you migrate the unripe assets that they will still be subject to a chop rate, such that you can basically get around the chop if you're able to migrate unripe assets. So this creates a problem where basically either you can't migrate your unripe assets at all, or you have to chop and then migrate the regular assets. And this kind of sucks. This is, like I said, the biggest problem with the fork migration system. But in general, this seems like positive insofar as it fixes, in my opinion, the largest outstanding problem with Beanstalk. And at the margin, the existing Beanstalk will remain upgradable, and so at least in the foreseeable future, there's no reason to force discontinuity of unripe, if that makes sense. And this gets into like what I think when people think about forks, there's a lot of like, at least reading the Discord over the past couple days, it seems like there's been quite a lot of fear and anger insofar as like, what about us? People are quite perturbed that there's going to be some new beanstalk. And from my perspective, I think one of the real beauties of the fork migration system is that the way in which the new beanstalks honor the old beanstalk is entirely up to the new fork. And so to the extent that there is tremendous value to Beanstalk in honoring all of its old obligations, it seems like that will be something that can play itself out in the market, where at least on this end, I intend to work on forks that will, to as much of an extent as seems reasonable, honor the old debt. And there may end up being more than one fork that does so. And so when it's all said and done, I don't think that it's unreasonable or even potentially unlikely that, the system, there ends up being multiple systems that each individually are able to honor the obligations of the original Beanstalk. So a far cry from like dishonoring the debt that exists. If anything, the way the fork migration system is set up, it could potentially allow for extra honoring of the debt, where you could imagine multiple Beanstalk forks having some degree of success and potentially getting to a point where each of those Beanstalk redeem back or pay back some of the original Beanstalk's obligations. And that wouldn't preclude Beanstalk from paying back some of Beanstalk's original obligations. So to me, I think, it's very clear that people are tremendously frustrated. I'm quite frustrated as well with it's very hard in practice being doxxed. And this is something we've talked about. I've talked about extensively, to sort of just like lead. That is not a position that I want to have. And it's not a position Brendan wants to have either. And so we're quite caught between wanting to participate in the discussion and contribute to Beanstalk, while at the same time not do so in a way that it sort of solidifies or increases the solidity in which people perceive us as leading the protocol. And yeah, it's quite frustrating when, we and I'm not saying that this isn't our fault per se. I'm just expressing that it's frustrating when we put out an article that, at least in my opinion, was quite nuanced, and it's sort of just shredded up in such a way that doesn't make having a discourse about the ideas very attractive to engage in publicly. It's like, there are some, I think, quite interesting ideas presented in the article, particularly around a solution to the governance problem, and the overwhelming negative everything. Like it's quite a difficult thing to engage in. So on the one hand, I'm very happy to be here, and to the extent people have questions or problems with this proposal, I'm more than happy to engage and talk about them. So I think it's really quite a strong proposal for Beanstalk, but at the same time, just want to call attention to the fact that I just feel like there's such an overwhelming sense of cynicism at the moment, and I mean, to some extent, it's crypto, and so people generally have quite a cynical perspective on a lot of this stuff. And based on my experience in the space, it's quite reasonable to be cynical. Like, people are really dodgy in this space in a way that is quite repulsive often. But at the same time, it's like there's so much love and effort that has gone in and continues to go into Beanstalk. It's really heartbreaking to see the way that people are talking about it. And, people think that the dev budget is still being stolen. Like, how is this the quality of the conversation at the moment? There's so much good work happening. You can look and literally see the commits. You can see the bips. And so to me, it's very painful to be trying to participate in a discussion about how to improve the system, how to fix the system, how to actually increase the likelihood that people get paid back. Because right now, that seems like it's not happening anytime soon unless ETH 10x's. So it's like, well, let's try to be proactive and try to make this thing work. And it just feels like the more, it feels like less is more at the moment because of the way even an article like this has been responded to. So the reason I mention that is I'm also open to conversation and feedback about the discourse and how we can, particularly as we try to turn this new page and hopefully enter a period with dramatically more experimentation than we've seen over the past 2 years, but hopefully a lot of repayment as well, a lot more than we've seen in the past 2 years, how we can potentially do that in a way that is a lot less leading to conflict. Right now, it feels like it really sucks. So that's my spiel. Yeah, I'm happy to talk more about any or all of this.
So Ben, one of the questions that I've seen pop up a handful of times through the Discord, and it's actually kind of can be encompassed with Nasdaq's question number 2, is just generally about this idea of let's call it asset transferability. And I think probably safe to say that a lot of that's going to come down to what are the particulars of any new fork, and you've kind of alluded to that. But anything else you want to add about that idea of current participants in this iteration of Beanstalk and the ability, at least in what you foresee, those participants' ability to kind of move from this iteration to another iteration or between iterations of Beanstalk in the future?
This is question 2, Jax.
Yeah, Nasdaq asked about the pod line specifically, but I think it's probably just a broader topic that people are interested in, not only for pods, but even just for Bean itself, or silo positions or what have you.
I'm a fan of reading the question as asked, so I don't miss anything.
Yep. So Nasdaq asks, what happens to Podline when migrating to a fork? Specifically, the fork you are planning, not just a vague the fork can set whatever rules answer?
Well, first, I just want to reiterate, even though he said not a vague, the fork can set whatever rules answer. The general structure is that, you can even imagine you have multiple beanstalks with their own independent pod lines that a new beanstalk wants to honor more than one of those pod lines. So how that beanstalk handles it, you can imagine, is not so simple. And so just want to reiterate the flexibility of this system is quite important from my perspective. And with that said, to answer specifically, as far as I'm aware, there's not there hasn't been any decisions made on what the specific migration will look like. Personally, I think the thing that would be best is if there was some basically full reset of the pod line such that the new beanstalk has a brand new pod line and the temperature can reset to 0, but all of the pods from the old beanstalk remain honored at some later market cap. So let's say, when the bean supply hits X, where X could be 100 million, a billion, 10 billion, when the bean supply hits a certain amount, at that point, the old pod line will start getting paid back. And you could do something similar for the old FERT holders, potentially, and something similar for deposits, where it's like the simplest version is all of the existing participants get some assets from the new beanstalk, and the new beanstalk starts to pay, those asset holders at some future supply. Does that make sense?
And if I was understanding you earlier too, I mean, one of the things you mentioned was the idea that what you just described, was something like a reset of the pod line and, future reincorporation, a particular market cap could happen in parallel with the existing system still staying in place, correct?
That's exactly right. So it's like any of these forks need not require you to burn your pods. They could, they could say the only way to mint pods in the new fork is if you burn your old pods, but that need not be the case. And personally, I don't think that makes the most sense. Like, if a new fork is going to honor the old fork, it should probably do so in a way that like maximizes people's level of contentness of staying in the system, if that makes sense. Now, on the other hand, it's like there is some cost to the new system of issuing these assets insofar as it could create like some initial supply overhang of people just wanting to, let's say you got issued 100,000 new pods from the new fork, and you're like, fuck this thing, I just want to take out any liquidity that I have. That could hamper the new beanstalk. So there is at least some reason to impose some cost to migrate. But these are the types of things that I think can be sort of discovered out in the wild based on how the market responds to this stuff. So from my perspective, it's, historically, I think one of the reasons why we find ourselves in the current predicament is that at every step, the DAO has decided to be as aggressive as possible with respect to honoring the pre-hack holders. And it's like, well, through this fork system, we certainly don't need to go from like 1 to 0 and just throw our hands up and declare failure or absolute failure. Instead, we can try out different potential changes. So it's like, well, if we push back the repayment until the supply hits $1 billion, how does that change things? Oh no, it's like there was still too much, people trying to just exit the system immediately, such that nothing happened. Maybe we need to be more aggressive. These are things that are almost impossible to answer without seriously seeing how it works out in the market, if that makes sense.
One thing I would add is that one of the examples that Ben just described, where a new beanstalk is deployed that just automatically honors old debt, whether it's pods, fertilizer, etc., doesn't even actually require the fork system. Anyone can deploy that version of Beanstalk tomorrow, permissionlessly.
Yeah, that's a great point. And this just, is something that I said in my little spiel, but I appreciate you sort of driving it home, Guy, which is that the main reason for the fork system is to make the new Beanstalk as minimally adversarial to the old Beanstalk to a large extent, because it supports the burning and minting of the beans itself. So instead of having like a sell and then buy, you can just have a changeover potential.
I wanted to briefly double click on Nasdaq's first question about the unripe with respect to the fork system, because I think it's helpful to go through a quick example. So currently, the recapitalization rate of unripe is something like 25 or 26%. And that amount squared is more or less 6%, which is the rate that people are currently getting for chopping. And so if I have 100 unripe beans, and the question with the fork system is, if the fork system is to allow unripe deposit migrations, how much is the fork system going to allow you to move with your unripe? How much of the underlying is it going to let you move? And thinking through to its conclusion, if the source beanstalk, the current beanstalk, allows you to migrate that full 25% that's underlying, it can't know how that destination beanstalk is actually going to handle it, and maybe the destination beanstalk just allows people to chop in exchange for that 25%, which is not okay. So to me, it's not necessarily a goal of the fork system to get rid of unripe, but it seems unclear if there are any constructions for doing so in a way that reasonably honors the arrangement of the barn in the current beanstalk. But idea is welcome.
All right. Keep pushing through Nasdaq's questions. So Nasdaq's question number 3. How do you square blaming a toxic community on lack of demand when there's been minimal communication from you guys? And how do you think you can fork a community?
So I do want to clarify. My intention with the language in the article was certainly not to blame the community for Beanstalk's failure. In fact, it was an acknowledgement of failure on our part for the community being so toxic. And so I'm sorry that it got misinterpreted in that way. As someone that prides myself on clarity in my writing, that was definitely a miss. But I don't want to give the impression that we blame the community for there being a lack of demand. Just the fact that things really are so toxic in the Discord, to me, it's quite a large failure, and it sucks. And it in juxtaposition to the quality of the community before the hack, it's like, night and day. I don't even think covers it. So that was more that was in the paragraph about our failures, and that was where the comment was coming from. Not pointing any fingers, other than acknowledging our own fault. And how do you think you can fork a community? Well, on the one hand, I don't really know. Like, we're going to find out. One thing I hope is that the energy will change quite substantively with a new forum. I'm certainly going to advocate for different censorship rules in that forum than in the Beanstalk forum. I think one of the open experiments with this forum was basically no censorship, even of, to me, what are clearly disingenuous comments, really just grossly negative, which, kind of sticking with the original vision, have never felt that it was a good idea to just ban people. At the same time, it's we got to try some different stuff, because this really is not working. So I think it's forking the community itself as a group of people. I don't know how that's going to go. I think one of the benefits of starting over to a large extent, even if some of the debt is honored, is we can also get a bit of a do-over with making a more positive environment for people to talk about this stuff. And the other thing is, I feel like when it comes to our involvement, it feels like a continuous gripe from people is that we're not around that much. And I feel like I'm hopeful that with the new forks, there will not be any of those expectations. And so perhaps that in and of itself will create a different tone. Honestly, I don't know, Nasdaq. And it's one of those things I have a, on the one hand, I love the Beanstalk community, and I've found so much joy from participating, and I've made some amazing friends as a result of it. But on the other hand, in its current form, I have negative interest in being a part of this community. It really is the most negative group in my life at the moment, is this Discord. Shout out Harry Smith and all of this gang of beans who just really have done a great job of making this just the worst place to spend any of my time, which sucks because I love Beanstalk so much, and I continue to think about Beanstalk all the time. This is not a forum or a community that I feel any interest in being a part of, frankly. And it's like that sucks. But I'm hopeful that with a bit of a clean start, there will once again be a setting where it's enjoyable to participate in discourse on this stuff. Like this is my favorite thing to talk about. Period. I think it's the coolest shit ever. And I continue to think it's gonna not just change the world, but be a big driver in the new economy that's gonna be built on this. This to me is still this was the dream of Beanstalk. It continues to be the dream of Beanstalk. It continues to be my dream. It's like, what does it mean to fork a community? You know, we're gonna find out. But I really hope that one of the results of forking the community, again, whatever that means, is like, hopefully we're gonna have a much more positive place to chat.
Thanks, Ben. All right, so to hop down to question number 4 from NASJAC. What happens to people invested in the 99 other forks not working when one of them starts work?
Well, I don't know. I assume that a lot of the forks will die quick and painful deaths, whereby there's basically a run on that beanstalk in favor of another beanstalk. It will very much likely be a survival of the fittest type of thing. Now, the other side of this is that as long as the new fork is willing to honor some sort of migration from the old forks that have now lost effectively to the new fork, then it's sort of like anyone that stayed on the old fork can still migrate with no loss to the new fork. On the other hand, it's not really in the interest of new beanstalks to honor old beanstalks' obligations in perpetuity, because then that sort of like backstops the liquidity in practice of the old beanstalk. So it's now like the new beanstalk has to take on like the full amount of the obligation of the old beanstalk. So it's like, I think in practice, the new beanstalks are incentivized to like honor migration of the liquid assets for some period of time and then cut it off. But how each of these, like particularly the question of what happens to people, it really depends on the terms of the new beanstalk with respect to the old beanstalks and which specific old beanstalk we're talking about here, because the new beanstalk may treat different versions of the different old versions of beanstalk differently.
All right, thank you.
One thing I would chime in with is, hearing something like, oh, maybe these other 99 beanstalks experience a run and end up dying can sound kind of scary. And the way my brain works is I immediately think, well, what if I'm not paying attention? How do I know to migrate? How do I choose which one to migrate to? And unclear if this will really exist in a version 1 of the fork migration system, but certainly in a fully featured version, a farmer should have the ability to, compose arbitrary logic to say, if 30% of the stock supply migrates to, destination beanstalk X, migrate me. If 5 of the top 20 stockholders migrate me. The ability to delegate migrating your assets, to a particular address. All of that, in theory, should be possible in a fully featured fork migration system.
And Guy, that functionality would be basically built using Tractor, correct?
Good shout. That's certainly one way to do it.
All right. So to jump to NASDAQ's question number 5, so really good question, interesting one. So NASDAQ asked, how will Basin handle Bean, he's referring to it as Bean 1 ETH and Bean 2 ETH, et cetera, liquidity pools. So liquidity pools based on different iterations of the Bean token.
I mean, on this end, I'm not sure what there is to handle exactly. I mean, presumably Bean 1 and Bean 2 would have different addresses. I mean, perhaps ideally different, iconography and such, such that they visually appear different. Perhaps they should have different names. Unclear on that front, but at least from a technical perspective, there's no issues as far as I'm concerned.
So it would be a process of implementing new wells for whatever those new liquidity pairs are, and eventually there could be, you could have, an ETH well with 3, 4, 5 X number of different wells, each pairing ETH or whatever asset to whatever version of Bean, right?
Exactly.
Thanks for chiming in there, Guy. I was muted. I didn't realize I was muted until you started talking, but you crushed it.
All right. And Nasdaq did have one more question in the chat, in the actual voice chat. So question number 6, do you intend to fork in parallel or in series?
I think it's an open question. Like in series, I mean, I don't even know if there's like a specific, I think we'd have to define our terms, if that makes sense. Like, does a Beanstalk have to fail? What would it mean for it to fail in order for another fork to be launched? Like unclear. So to me, it's like much more likely that there ends up being multiple forks at once. When it comes to launching them in parallel, I don't know, honestly. Like maybe at some point it will make sense to do like straight A/B testing and launch 2 Beanstalks at the exact same time or very similar times. My guess is to start, that's probably a bit much, but I don't know.
All right. So in the voice channel chat, the next question is actually from Crypto Wizard. So they ask, what's the incentive for unripe
You're
holders?
skipping Kakalango on purpose? I think they had an
No,
interest.
I'm not skipping them on purpose, just looking at 2 different channels at the same time, trying to keep
Sure.
questions.
We can go in whatever order to make sure we're not skipping people.
Yep. Give me 1 second here.
God forbid I get accused of, not answering anyone's questions.
All right. Let's see. Where was that question you're seeing, Ben?
I think that's Town Hall Chat 1032.
Town Hall Chat. All right. Yep. All right. Sounds good. So yeah, we'll go through that one now. All right. I can read through it. Would you? Well,
I would say just
give it to you, Ben.
The question itself, I think would be good.
Yep. So you said third paragraph. So third paragraph is, I think the reason your article got some pushback was it ignored 2 key issues and cited 2 other ones as the main issues. One has already been named, or has been memed, the data. The other, fair governance, is messy. However, to me, I think the lack of mints, which was a primary driver of the original growth spike pre-hack, being caused by the bot, was a major issue in more people not adopting Bean. I'd also argue that the temperature reaching so high has also contributed, and this is of course connected to the first issue. What is your comment on this?
Okay. This is a bit of a lengthy question, so please humor me as I try my best.
Ben, I don't mean to interrupt you, but I did just get I got a raid alert over Discord for Beanstalk, and it says just unusual DM activity in the Beanstalk Discord. Just wanted to mention that as an alert I just got. Go ahead.
Thanks, Rex. I'm not sliding into anyone's DMs at the moment, so it's not me. All right. So I appreciate the perspective that the lack of mints and the bot, I guess I'm reading this as that's one. It's unclear to me if that's one issue or that's both of the issues, but then also the temperature reaching so high, so that might be 3 issues. Hard to disagree with the fact that the lack of mints was a problem, insofar as to the extent that Beanstalk was able to mint a sufficient amount where it was able to initiate a single like real growth cycle and inflow of capital post exploit. I think that the fact that didn't happen sort of tautologically was not good and did in fact lead to where we are right now. With respect to the bot being the cause of that, I think at this point, my perspective on people complaining about bots is quite clear, which to restate is that automated execution is a feature, not a bug. And something like Tractor is designed to enable more people to have autonomous execution within the system. And therefore, I think it's quite a red herring to say that you had one large participant or multiple large participants that had better execution than others. And that was the problem with the system. Like, that's just objectively wrong. The only thing that better execution could get you is better execution over other participants in the system. The bot or any other large participant acting in a way that they view to be their own self-interest, like that's the name of the game. that is what Beanstalk is trying to do, is create a series of incentives whereby people acting in their own capacity actually contribute to peg maintenance. So I feel like it's a little bit, it's quite wrong to attribute the current state of things to be the bot. Like that's not a real. The answer is that the current system doesn't work well enough. And another valid answer is that the amount of debt in the system is simply too large, given the current circumstances, such that no one is willing to buy it. But the idea that the whole problem here is autonomous execution of someone's strategy with respect to Beanstalk is objectively wrong. The temperature reaching so high, I don't know if I would say this is causal to the problem as much as a result of the problem, but we're definitely in a situation now where even at these crazy high temperatures, there's not real interest in lending to the protocol, and that in result leads to a lack of peg maintenance and therefore a lack of mints. So it's like, to me, the reality is the main reason that we're here is because the system isn't good enough. And this feeds into a dynamic where, from my perspective, it's incredibly important that we and others are able to continue to experiment on improving the protocol, because it's not good enough yet. And it's like, to me, I think it's much more constructive than blaming a bot, which again is just one or more large participants executing their strategy autonomously, versus the incentives that the system is creating clearly are not sufficient to achieve its goals. And it's like, I don't know. It would be impossible to know at this point whether it's just the lack of mints, whether it's the amount of debt that it has, whether it's the temperature, whether it's the incentives. It's basically impossible to know that, or to even get an indication as to what that is, given the lack of activity or data happening in the. So, to your point about the data stuff has been memed. Like, you can meme it all you want. It's not a meme. The current state of Beanstalk is that we don't know how to make it better, significantly better at this point. Like, we just are not, at least from my perspective, I don't have any big ideas at this point without seeing more data. So that's where we're at. And then I think it would be good, Rex, if you also read their last sentence, which seems like a question.
And Ben, you mean the last, right after, what is your comment on this?
Oh,
or
they say,
their bottom couple paragraphs?
The bottom,
secondarily,
without mud raking.
Yeah. Yep. So I'll start with the paragraph right before that. So secondarily, the impact of your article has been to drain a significant portion of the main protocol and drop the price of beans significantly. Without mud raking, genuinely keen to your learning of any missteps that have led us here with the management of this process, and any ideas you have going forward to remedy it. No point using forks to honor the debt of a dead protocol that no one has any trust in going forward, I'd argue.
Well, I really appreciate this question or ask, because this is speaking candidly, I was quite surprised by the response to the article being so apocalyptic. Like, that was not the vibe that I thought the article was going to create. And I think to a large extent that just shows a little bit the disconnect between where my head is at and where the community's head is at. And I think a large part of that might be that I don't participate that much in the discourse. On the one hand, I think people chopping and leaving is long-term really good for Beanstalk without sort of a clearing out. It seems almost impossible that this version of Beanstalk can thrive again. But on the other hand, I find it quite dissatisfying. I don't even know if that's the right word, unpleasant, that people are now chopping because of an article that we wrote, which, again, if we go back to taking a step back in the community, it's exactly because I don't want that. I don't want to be able to raise my voice and have such a large impact on the system. This is something that again and again I've said I really don't want But I think one of the big lessons here is that for the time being, like kind of stuck with it. And so I think just like it's very hard. It's very hard to know what the right way to present is at this point. Speaking candidly, like I continue to be incredibly bullish on Beanstalk as an idea. At this point, I don't know which version of Beanstalk, the existing one, any of the new ones, which one is most likely to be most successful. I don't know if it's possible that more than one are highly successful, but I feel like one of my big goals with the fork is going to be to try to like seed a new community with a similar like zest and spirit to the original Beanstalk community before the hack. And I think to that extent, like I was saying before, maybe just having better expectations about like how much I'll be involved in the discourse or speaking regularly, maybe that will help. But candidly, like this is one of those things where this continues to be a big struggle of mine that I don't have a good answer for. Like I think it's probably clear, evident that through a call like this, like I have so much to say and I care so much about this project. This is the work of my life and continues to be. And so it's like I don't have a good answer at this point as to how to sort of bridge this gap where now we're doxxed. Everyone knows who I am. I don't want to be in charge or the leader of Beanstalk, but it's objectively clear that there's like a tremendous amount of benefit to me coming here and talking with everyone. So I don't know, man. I don't know, but I think like one big learning is just that I'm not as in touch with the community as I would like to be, or I think I need to be at this point. And maybe like the tone of the article would have been quite different had I been aware of how negative the sentiment or the reception was going to be. This is, post exploit. I don't think that like I think by far the hardest problem has been navigating this dynamic, and it feels like it kind of got away from us. Where it's like it's so negative, I don't want to participate. Are not participating leads to more negativity, and it was just sort of a downward spiral. And then, once a quarter or so, we'd come and either present or do like a FUD session, and it's like that was all defense, no offense. And sometimes the best defense is a good offense. So probably gotta change up our tactics there.
Well, we're a little bit past the top of the hour. There's still lots of chatter and a handful of channels. Ben, how long you want to go?
I got time, Rex.
All right. Well, we'll keep rolling. We'll go for a little while longer. We'll see what distance we can cover. So, kind of looking down through the town hall chat, seeing some comments, some questions. It looks like so. The next question.
Well, why don't we just go in line? So Crypto Wizard says, that's exactly the sentiment I have. Everyone in the original community gets wrecked, whether you hold FERT or pods or unripe. Like, this is exactly the type of stuff where I don't feel like the article that we put out, it would be inappropriate in that article to declare what the plans for a new fork are. So it's like these types of comments, which I think are downstream of a lot of the FUD and the trolling that happened after the article went live. I just want to push back and say, in my opinion, that's totally wrong. In my opinion, these forks significantly increase the likelihood that people get paid back at this point. So just the idea that this is fucking everyone, like that's in my opinion, that is the opposite. In my opinion, this is generally going to be massively positive for holders. And I guess when I say my opinion, that's my prediction, is that moving to a fork system where there's rapid innovation and experimentation will significantly increase the likelihood that people get paid back as opposed to diminishing it.
Can I follow up on that? Sorry,
yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. So, the reason why I say that seems like there's some other people sort of thinking the same thing. It just seems like game theory wise, for any new
entrance for the forks, there would be no reason to pay back the old holders, right? Like if I'm putting money into a system, I would be voting to get less money and pay back previous holders. Like why would anyone be incentivized to do that?
Well, one, this sort of implies that there will be multiple forks such that people who are participating get to choose. Like, do I want to just go with the clean fork, or do I go with the fork that honors the old debt in some capacity? I think from a pure, like, if that was the trade off, I think you're probably right that most people would just move to the new system that's totally clean. However, this is the beauty of, in practice, like, it's up to the people that are deploying the fork on how to honor the previous positions. And from my perspective, like, there's no reason to start with a fork that says, like, fuck everyone, no honoring of any of the debt. And it's much better to do something where the first fork or the first couple of forks attempt to honor all the old debt in some capacity, or a fraction of the old debt in some capacity, and then only if none of that works would I think it makes sense to start from scratch, if that makes sense. So to me, it's like the game theory here is largely dependent on how many forks are out there and what the like who's working on those forks, if at all. To me, there is a big incentive to someone deploying a new fork to honor the old debt, particularly because of how powerful this community can be. So I don't think it's so cut and dry. Like, there's going to be two options and everyone's just going to go to the option that says fuck all the old holders. But you never know. Like, even if we don't work on a fork anytime soon that basically doesn't honor any of the old debt, there's nothing that says other people won't. Now, at the same time, nobody has to date. And to Guy's point earlier, there's been nothing at all preventing them from already doing that. So I don't really view that as a problem. Like, that's already the circumstance that we find ourselves in.
Yeah, that makes sense to me. I think, if I can give my 2 cents, it's critically important to not leave everyone in the dust. I think more than likely, it's going to be the original team creating the forks. I don't know if anyone else has the knowledge and capabilities and interest of doing it other than you guys. So I really do think the community would probably combust if everyone kind of gets left behind. This is coming from someone who owns just about everything. I hold pods, whole bunch of pods, whole bunch of fert, and unripe as well. And like my current sentiment is, if I was left behind, I probably wouldn't participate in any form of Beanstalk. But if there was some like codified way of still being made somewhat whole, obviously asking for 100% back is a lot. But that's kind of where my head is at the moment.
I appreciate that perspective tremendously and would encourage you and anyone else that wants to comment about what would be the terms that they would be inclined or not inclined to participate in the new versions. I think that's incredibly helpful information to have. And I would also add that I think one of the benefits of the fork system is that, there has been some proposals floated in the DAO to restructure the debt in the existing Beanstalk. And there's been a ton of pushback to that. And so this is sort of this is the best of both worlds, where there's no need to force a restructure on anyone that doesn't want it, but can also restructure at the same time.
All right. Well, to keep rolling right on through that town hall chat. So a Huget says Harry's back in jail again, or might be in the future, or maybe in a future Discord. Moving on to Milky Bear. So Milky Bear writes, on the discourse, I think it's really impressive the amount of work that the founders had put into this project. The presentation put together on the state of Beanstalk was a huge effort and should be commended. The fact that you didn't just throw your hands up in the air and peace out from the protocol is honorable and should be commended. However, when you say the dialogue or discussion is low and unconstructive is unfair to the people that make thoughtful and considerable contributions in the Discord. I think this compounds the exact problem you're trying to avoid, just to note for future communication. And they end with, the majority of the toxicity is because it's a money the majority of toxicity is because it's money and people are emotional. It's just a matter of pushing through and ignoring the obvious garbage.
I didn't really hear a question there, but do want to acknowledge the point you're making and think it's fair. In fact, some of the people that continue to participate genuinely in the discourse, I mean, it's really amazing and inspiring. But at the same time, it's such a small amount of the discourse that, you can try to sift through it, but it's still quite an unpleasurable experience to go through the Discord. So I hope that this is one of the things that is fixed in the fork forum, where it will be a much higher amount of actual significant conversation or meaningful conversation as opposed to just toxicity.
All right, next in town hall chat. So Crypto Wizard followed up, and I think this has really been addressed through the conversation you guys just had. But they asked who participated in a new fork.
I think yeah. Let's just, in the spirit of time, let's maybe go through the next questions. I think Kakalengo is next.
Yep. So writes thirdly. So how would you comment on this quote? I don't have any desire whatsoever to try to get people to adopt Basin or adopt Beanstalk. How does this square with your love of Beanstalk, which I don't doubt?
Well, this is sort of the thing I was talking about earlier that I haven't figured out. And I would add to the problem is that I think I'm probably the best person to try to get people to adopt Beanstalk because I think I'm probably the most passionate about it, or up there certainly. And so it's like on the one hand, Beanstalk would benefit tremendously from me being a spokesperson, and I am quite well suited to be that spokesperson. But there's this fundamental belief I have, which is that it is wrong for me to be the spokesperson in a non-anonymous capacity. And unfortunately, the ship has already sailed on that. So I don't know if it's like maybe the right thing to do is to say like, I will speak for a year and then I'm going dark. I don't know. When you're like, how does that square? I have not been able to square it. So here we are.
So last bit of question from Kakalango's post is, you seem anti-marketing in my discussion with you for reasons I couldn't put my finger on. Have you had any changes of heart with regard to what it means to interface great technology with people?
So unfortunately, I see you reference a class here. I just don't know what you're talking about exactly, and I can't listen to it right now. So we're in this call. Interface great technology with people. I'm sorry, I just don't understand. But if you want to clarify what you're referring to, maybe I can try to answer it.
I can do that if you'd like.
Sure.
Yeah, sorry. So thank you for showing up and sharing again. Your energy is helpful and infectious. Yeah, the question also above, it's related. This wasn't about you being the spokesperson. It was simply about how to market this product, right? Which is not about easy films or anything, but about a genuine strategy to bring a product to market. So I understand your reason to step away from the thing, but I would say the quote above from that class is actually, maybe we've all understood it wrong, right? That you said, I don't have any desire to get people to try to adopt this. I guess many questions are, how do you help other people try to get people to adopt it better if you're not going to be the spokesperson? And how does marketing even these new forks fit in? It seems like, and every misstep or every trial is a space for learning, right? This is an experiment, and so do I. But it does seem like that even the launch announcement of these forks has been very poorly marketed. How do we change that? I want this to work still. And what does it mean if you are on calls saying, I don't have any desire whatsoever to get people to adopt this? Thank you.
Thank you. Well, I think one thing I can say is that to the extent that there is genuine work, this is a DAO. Anyone can just step up and start working on something.
Did I turn the light off on your thing?
I'm sorry. I think someone's unmuted. Sorry. To the extent that there are people that want to market Beanstalk or want to market the forks, I'm always here to chat and brainstorm and ideate. I think if you ask any of the people that are contributing to Beanstalk now, I try to make myself quite accessible. Like anyone that is spending their their time and energy and effort on Beanstalk is someone I want to help. I guess unless you're using your time, energy, and effort to bring the thing down. But to the extent that people actually want to like help Beanstalk, I'm happy to be a resource. But at the same time, I do feel quite strongly that it would be wrong, really wrong, if I was responsible either officially or unofficially for marketing Beanstalk. I do think that it goes quite against the ethos of a permissionless autonomous currency. And I think it's worth saying, like, I appreciate that you say, my energy is contagious. I don't know exactly what word you used, but it's like the thing is supposed to speak for itself, res ipsa, I think is the Latin, where it's like this thing has to be so fucking good that I don't need to come out and talk about it. It just works. And we're not there yet. And that's okay. But it's like, what are we even marketing here? We're marketing an experiment. Like, come experiment, I guess. But it's like, I feel like the right people to participate in such an experiment are just kind of going to find it. Like, they don't need to be marketed to. And I see you wrote here that this is egg salad. It's funny, when you were talking, I was like, this sounds like egg salad. So nice to chat first time in a while.
All right, Milky Bear's got a couple good questions. Actually, right above that comment from Egg Salad. So, first question: who has the ultimate right to move underlying assets? FERT holders or unripe holders? How much of the underlying do they have access to?
Well, I think FERT holders have no claim to the underlying. The barn raise allowed for people to buy FERT, which is debt, and they hold that debt. They hold those sprouts associated with the FERT. And as part of the purchase of FERT, that led to value being added to the liquidity pool and an increase in the value held by unripe holders associated with that value that was added from the FERT purchase. So, at least from my perspective, which is also the perspective of the Beanstalk code, which is what my perspective is informed by, I think what the code says is legitimate, is that it's owned by the unripe holders, but under the terms where they have to chop and so on and so forth. But when you say how much of the underlying do they have access to, like, FERT holders have access to none of it, unripe holders have access to whatever amount they can chop, and all of that is defined by the protocol.
And Milky Bear's second question is: you guys seem to have put some thought into what a new fork would look like on putting out a fork. What would a proposal for a new? When would a proposal for a new fork be forthcoming?
I don't know. Maybe sometime in the next month or so would be my hope.
All right. Kagalengos has that comment below. Then next question from Milky Bear is: do you know who is running the bot? Why do you think they are not open to why the bot acts in this manner? And what do you think of a BIP to essentially neuter the bot's actions?
So I think in general, it's quite inappropriate for me to be commenting on who anyone is. In general, I think the pseudonymity associated with Ethereum is like not even good enough. I think we probably want open financial systems that are much more private than the existing one, but I certainly don't want to dox people independent of whether I know any one particular participant in the system. Why do I think that they are not open with why the bot acts in this manner? Quite difficult to speculate. And it's like, I feel like, at least from my perspective, if you observe what the bots are doing, to me, it's relatively clear what the strategies are that are being run, such that it's like, I feel like they are quite open with why the bots act the way they do, insofar as like what the bot is doing is transparent. So it's like, it might be helpful if there was some analysis done on, like, based on what we can observe the bot doing, here's what it seems like their strategy is, and then what we can infer from that. I think that would be maybe some interesting analysis. But it's like, is there ever a world where it's like, I'm going to say, this is who's running the bot, this is why they're running the bot? No, that's not. I think that's highly inappropriate. What do I think of a BIP to essentially neuter the bot's actions? I think that would be crazy, like given that the whole point of Beanstalk is to create incentives where it leads to certain outcomes, and the bot is simply executing based on their incentives in a highly efficient manner. So it's like, to me, to make the bot the problem that Beanstalk is addressing is totally misaligned with the values of an open system like Beanstalk, and misses the point, which is that Beanstalk is not growing not because of the bot, but because of like either a too much debt or not a highly like a model without sufficient efficacy given its circumstances. But I really don't think the bot is a problem, frankly.
I mean, if I can just chime in briefly on the bot front, this is just my intuition. Could very well be wrong. But to some extent, it feels like at some level when people are expressing disdain about the bot, it feels less that it's about that the execution is automated and more that, the owner of such a bot just has a lot of ammo and is a large participant, which is a different complaint. And, so there's, FUD about, bots that convert unripe down. And then, for example, over the last week or so, I'm not sure if it's easy to check historical data on Dune, but I believe that 11 million unripe chop was the largest stockholder at the time. Like, don't quote me on it, but I think it was like they had like 6-7% of the stock supply. And all that got burned and doesn't exist anymore. And then that got fudded. And I find it a little bit difficult to follow. It feels a little bit like a contradiction, at least in my opinion. And given the nature of the stock system, or rather, given the pseudonymous nature of interacting with Beanstalk, particularly where, you can't know how many addresses people have, it's hard to know how reliable the data around, addresses that have what amount of stock ownership and how that maps onto particular parties. But, now I think that if you look at Dune today, the largest stockholder is something like 3.2% of stock ownership, which given the size of Beanstalk, compared to the token distributions of other, call it governance tokens in DeFi, like night and day, in my view. And it's hard to imagine a better system than something like what stock does, where it's constantly inflating and diluting existing participants. It's very difficult to imagine a better system for making, whoever these large participants are, smaller and smaller with time.
I love you. My main jokes.
Somebody's off mute. Okay, I think we're good. So we're at 90 minutes. Ben, Guy, what do you think?
I say we keep going, Rex.
All right, we'll keep going. Okay.
And if you have to go or anything, I'm happy to read questions.
You know what? Honestly, admittedly, I probably should, and I hate to I'd sound like the old dad in this group, but I actually do need to get home. I'm supposed to be running kids around here in a little while, so if I could cut out, Guy, if you'd be willing to take over, I would sincerely appreciate it.
Yeah, no worries, sir. Appreciate your help.
Hey, appreciate you and appreciate the community. Thanks, and thank you, Ben.
Of course.
I'm not sure where we were.
So
we were at Colango at 56 minutes after the hour.
Okay. All right.
In the town hall chat.
Yep. I'll go through those and then perhaps we can revisit the Barnyard voice chat questions. Okay, so Kakalongo says, your answer regarding the bot seems like it creates a situation, a protocol exclusively for whales and corporate users. To me, I'm just making sure there's a question. Okay, yeah, to me, a huge part of driving a billion bean adoption was offering what is essentially a decentralized USD bank. What we have is an oligarchy where large users can easily usurp the protocol and drain the liquidity of users too small to pay someone to automate or not talented at coding enough to program something themselves. TLDR, what if one reason why Beanstalk isn't better, quote, isn't better, end quote, is because it was usurped by large users through an automation technique with a relatively high barrier to entry, at least too high for lay investors?
Well, I think on the one hand, there is some truth to this, that currently automating your activity in Beanstalk has quite a high barrier to entry in terms of scale and or cost. But in terms of solution to that specific issue, Tractor is a system that can generalize automated execution and allow people to basically submit orders that anyone can fill such that they in practice get automated execution. So I think this is a problem that is actively being worked on with a clear solution in sight. Furthermore, like once you have Tractor, particularly if Beanstalk were on an L2, for example, the cost to automate or pay for someone else to execute your strategy automatically should be quite low. But with respect to the idea that what we have is an oligarchy where large users can easily usurp the protocol and drain the liquidity of users too small, like, I disagree with that wholeheartedly. I think Beanstalk is probably next to Bitcoin, the system that the crypto system that has the fairest ownership distribution. Period. No pre-mine, no team allocation. We Publius never took any like initial allocation other than the 100 beans that were the reward for the first sunrise call. It's like, how could the problem be an oligarchy of large users? I mean, you could say like the system is still at a point where it's so small that you have some large users that have a large say, and there aren't enough large users to sort of offset one another because there's not enough diversity in the large users' positions or strategy. The way it is being.
Is it just me that's having trouble hearing Ben?
No, I can't. He's cutting in.
Hey, Ben, we're losing you.
Hey, can you?
It sounds great now. Can you rewind 20 seconds?
Sorry, I my phone lost internet. I switched to the comp. Does anyone? Can you cue me what I was saying before I got lost?
I don't quite remember, frankly, but it was 20 or 30 seconds ago.
I don't know how much that helps me.
Sorry.
What I was trying to say is that it's like there may be some truth to the fact that there are larger users that have a larger outsized effect on Beanstalk in its current state. But this is something that I think is quite practically solved with time, insofar as you'd expect, or at least with growth, maybe not with time, where you'd expect new participants to significantly dilute the existing large users. Now, on the other hand, it's like there's nothing to say that this problem won't exist in the future, where you have larger participants coming in, and the reason for the growth is that now you have like mega whales entering the system, such that they now control a significant amount of the system. But I feel like this is growing pains, like new money coming in, new powers in the system. They're always going to have larger interest or larger influence in the system. This is just the nature of the beast. But I don't think that's like to me, it's not really a real issue. The issue has to be the model itself. You could say that the issue is the distribution of participants, but I would be hard pressed to find that a compelling argument at the current moment.
All right, the next question is, what was the reason then for raising the chop rate if that wasn't what y'all wanted to incentivize? I'm not quite sure what that is referring to.
I think it might be referring to my previous comment that I was surprised by the amount of chopping and stuff post the article. So maybe Egg Salad, feel free to hop in if that's not what you were trying to say. But yeah, go ahead.
I think that was someone else that accidentally unmuted.
Nice. Well, I was just going to say that in general, there was like no chopping happening whatsoever. And that was generally to me an indicator that the chop rate was far too low. That had nothing to do with the article per se.
All right, Kakalongo's next question. I'm just reading. It said, I mean, one of the key partners, Root Manifold, whoever, dropped 11 million beans, so what? They're just now totally disconnected from the project. No one thought to check such a move with a large stockholder.
Where
And
is
I'm
this?
just not really sure what that would mean to check. 36 minutes ago, 04, beginning of the last hour, in the town hall chat, right below Safi's screenshot. Not a question.
It said,
yeah. Okay. Yeah. They said rhetorical.
I don't
not a
think
question.
I don't think this is right either. Like, I don't think Root chopped 11 million beans. I don't think they had.
Yeah, I mean,
I don't think that's correct.
Just operating off of public knowledge, you had to have beans or bean LP tokens in the silo prior to the exploit to have unripe. So the only way to have unripe was either to have assets in the silo before the exploit. And based on my understanding, Root didn't exist at that point in time. I mean, perhaps anyone could have acquired them by buying unripe OTC, but I feel like that could probably be easily verified by following the chain. Maybe I'll just read RL's comment in case you want to respond to any of it. I joined late, so I don't know if y'all mentioned this already, but I'll say my piece. If y'all plan on forking, please do a hard reset. No pre-existing podline or anything. To repay back the people who got hacked, give them a small percentage of new mints after the fork has already gained traction. If you attempt to, quote, honor the old debts on your new forks, Your new forks will be dead on arrival, in my opinion. New money will not enter the space unless there is a financial incentive to do so. The old debt acts as a disincentive. I feel like that was relatively covered that with your conversation with Crypto Wizard. Hujet says, "Aren't you afraid of people making rug forks and damaging Bean brand? At least what's left."
I just want to acknowledge that comment and say I agree.
Totally. Hujet asks, "Aren't you afraid of people making rug forks and damaging Bean brand? At least what's left of it."
Well, yes and no. Yes, insofar as I feel like people making rug forks is going to be a problem in our space for a long time, and that's really ugly. On the other hand, that's not a reason, in my opinion, not to move forward with this plan, which to me is really quite elegant and sophisticated, and is the response to like a 2-year existential crisis for Beanstalk of what to do with governance. So it's like people making rug forks of anything is possible. I don't think that has anything to do with like substantively how to move forward here. But I acknowledge the risk.
Let's see. I mean, do you want to go through all the comments? What are you feeling?
Well, I'm reading through. I feel like
Mixolydian is the next question.
Yeah, any questions I feel like are good to try to answer. But like all the comments, I encourage people to read on their own time, if that makes sense.
Great. Mixolydian asks, "Why do you feel creating a fork is better than simply waiting for the market to come back and releasing Beanstalk 3? Why not give it a chance to prove that it really can't come back when so close to goal? Feel like the community have been generally fine until the last 2 days."
I mean, this is to me where it's like the fork system is a response to the governance problem. That is different than the decision that now is the right time to fork. Why fork now? It's like I disagree with the idea that we're so close to goal. Like the bean price is 50 something cents. We're millions of dollars away from peg. There's no positive inflow into the system whatsoever. There's nothing to indicate that would change anytime soon. It's just like at some point you got to declare this isn't working. And I think we're at that point.
Milky Bear asked, "The lack of mints are a problem because that attracts new users. The bot is stopping the mints. Is there a way to address the bot's incentives? My problem isn't with automation that is great."
Well, this is where I think we kind of have a catch-22 where it's like, maybe it's not a catch-22, but there are potentially ways to address like the current incentives, not just around the bot, but any conversion. And at the same time, in order to actually understand the right way to address that, we need more data. So it's like, if we had the information now, maybe we could change the incentive such that this wasn't necessary. On the other hand, I don't really think we have that data right now. I have a couple ideas. One would be to have negative seeds, where it's like you actually are losing grown stock for holding an asset with negative seeds in the silo, which would much more aggressively encourage converts. Like that's probably the best idea I have on this front at the moment.
I mean, I know you said it's just an idea, but like what assets or what directions of converts, I guess, yeah, what assets in what state would be worthy of having negative seeds?
Well, like right now, there is seemingly not a strong enough incentive to convert from LP to Bean, or it's like maybe having like holding LP at this point because we've been below peg for so many months. Beanstalk's going to start charging you for not converting. Like the reason this system is dangerous or the solution is dangerous is because now you sort of go back to a system where you might encourage converting too aggressively upward, which could in practice have the effect of sort of like a hard peg. But on the other hand, if the system waits, and I'm kind of just talking out loud here, honestly, if the system waits a certain amount of time where it's below peg by a certain threshold for a certain amount of time before this is triggered, then you sort of guarantee, or Beanstalk can guarantee that the full outflow has occurred, and then it starts to aggressively incentivize the converts. Now, even that can potentially be gamed if it's like, oh, well, in 3 days, the system's going to start, penalizing people for not converting. So we expect it to convert in 3 days. So we'll wait to sell. Like now you get into a weird, I'm not exactly sure what the game theory optimal move would be in that case, but I think it's an interesting idea. Certainly.
Totally. Or even maybe like a a small fixed negative seeds for unripe LP or something.
There's a lot of ways to do it.
All right, Jay asks, what about the current system doesn't work well enough aside from debt? Some of the debt restructuring ideas mentioned today sound very reasonable and allow for that market testing of what parameters would bring new investment. Forks seem to be dilutive in capital, community interest, developer time, as well as creating switching costs. Are you committed to the forking, or would you consider restructuring and keeping the team's focus here on the OG Beans?
Well, two separate questions there. One, what about the current system doesn't work well enough? I think you look at Beanstalk at a high level, and it's like the field is the primary mechanism and the silo conversions are the secondary mechanism. I think to the idea of having negative seeds in some instances speaks to the idea that the current convert system is still not where it could be. I think the seed gauge system took a big step forward in that. Beanstalk 3 is also going to take another step in creating more efficiency in the silo. But ultimately, I think where we're sort of short is like this, I don't even know how to describe it, like squeezing that the system could do in certain instances where it really aggressively incentivizes certain behavior. Like at this point, a convert upward. Like at this point, Beanstalk really wants a convert upward objectively. So it's like from Beanstalk's perspective, it sucks that no one is converting, but it's like it's already at its maximum incentive to incentivize converts upwards. So it's like the best thing it can do is, the best thing we can do is change the model to be even more aggressive in its incentive structure with something like negative seeds.
I mean, you could always tune the min and max, bean to max LP ratios.
Totally, but to me that's I guess that wouldn't require a change in the code, but it's like this is still it's tweaking the same thing. It's just like a different way to tweak it. Or it's like I don't know if changing that ratio is going to be enough at this point. It seems like probably not.
Agreed. Just thought it was worth pointing out.
Totally. Are you committed to the forking, or would you consider restructuring and keeping the team's focus here on the OG Beanstalk? From my perspective, like there was a lot of conversation and ideas floated on restructuring. It didn't seem to be very. I think at this point it's in the best interest of everyone to fork. That's my perspective.
Dean Bankman Refried asks, where is your head at with regard to the Beanstalk brand? Do you think it needs to rebrand? If yes, what other properties of a new brand that you would like to see? And if not, why?
I mean, this is a little heartbreaking because I love the Beanstalk brand. I think it's so beautiful. But at the same time, I think it's kind of dog shit right now. People hate it. So I think a rebrand is probably in order. Personally, I'd like to see something that's a little bit cleaner, a little bit less gimmicky. Like I find the farming stuff to be a little bit childlike, whereas we're trying to build something that's going to change the world. And I don't know if the informal farming theme captures it. I'd really like to see like continued use of the language and the Beanstalk terms, which I find the whole metaphor to be very elegant. But I feel like we would probably benefit from a fresh feel. So more on that, I think, sometime in the next month or so, hopefully.
Right. I'm going to move over to the chat attached to the voice channel. And I'll try to scroll to the top of where people had questions. Okay. I believe the top is the Crypto Wizard's question about delegation. Hopping back to the fork system. Solution to the governance problem is delegation. No, I think people are frustrated because an unannounced fork system sounds like people being left in the dust. That's a communication problem. Millions of dollars were chopped due to the article. Seems rather obvious that would happen. IMO.
Well, the governance problem is not delegation related. The governance problem is that there doesn't seem to be a good way to have the ability to upgrade Beanstalk without imposing changes on an unwilling minority or majority. And like delegation just makes it easier for people to be able to vote. Beanstalk already has delegation and people still aren't voting. So I don't agree that the solution to the governance problem is delegation.
Mod asks, thoughts on starting a new pod line to bring the field back in play for the current Beanstalk. The way it would work is the new pod line gets paid, and if there are no pods in the new line, then the old one gets paid. So I guess every time someone new sows, you go to the front of the pod line, more or less.
Well, personally, I am in favor of this idea. I think it is valuable for the DAO to consider restructuring the debt for the existing Beanstalk. But again, given the negative reception of this to date, I feel like it's more elegant to just fork without, forcing anyone into a restructure that they don't want. And it's kind of like you could just start the new Beanstalk with this exact solution as well. So those are my thoughts.
Agreed. To some extent, I feel like doing that on the existing Beanstalk would be a violation of principles to a large extent. I mean, that was the main argument presented in a lot of that discussion around the temp check, and now with this, fork system, it's not necessary it feels unnecessary to do that, in my view. Right, Crypto Wizard asks, okay, sounds like all debt holders, everyone who could help revive the protocol gets wrecked. Seems like the community would be destroyed. TBA. The question is, even FERT not being honored until a later market cap, for real.
This sucks, It sucks. What's there to say? Like, this is not the position we want to be in.
All right. Nasdaq has a question, I believe, about plots related to the fork migration system. He asks, would they be burned when harvested, or would people harvest twice if both systems end up working? Assuming the former.
Well, it depends on what the fork wants. So the fork could create it such that the only way to get pods in the new system is to burn the pods in the old system, or it could be that you get the ability to harvest twice potentially. I'm privy to the latter personally. Privy is the right word there, but I'm biased towards the latter.
Okay, Bean Bankman Refried asks, is there a concern that the fork migration system might make somewhat easier to create and pass off scam forks as legit? Are there going to be any code diff reports of destination Beanstalk to easily inform people of changes in code for the non-devs and less technically savvy farmers?
I think the short answer is there is concern, and I think a good process, unclear how exactly that database would be maintained. It's like you don't really want to have like some website that is being run by some centralized group that sort of gets to choose which Beanstalks are in or out. But on the other hand, like, definitely needs some way to make it easy for non-technical people to check that they're engaging in it's hard to even know, given that at least at the beginning, I would expect most of these forks to still be governed by a multi-sig, because it's like you don't really want to make an immutable contract that could have problems day one. Hard to know how to provide those guarantees to people, frankly. This is definitely a concern.
Okay. There were a few questions that were already answered from people posting it in the town hall chat as well. Let me see. Oh, I guess, this question was more or less answered once. And Nasdaq says, what about the current system doesn't work well enough aside from the debt? He follows up saying, what parameters are you planning to change? L2SR, temp change rate. Tough to say system didn't work at current parameters when we had such a run pre-exploit. Forking Discord for each fork and running away from toxicity. Toxicity is such cope.
What timestamp is this at?
14 minutes after the last hour in the Barnyard voice chat.
Oh my god, this chat is fat. Well, with respect to tough to say system didn't work at current parameters when we had such a run pre-exploit, I would argue that the system was just in a radically different state post-exploit. Way different liquidity, way different momentum. I don't know if it's I don't know how reasonable that is. With respect to the forking Discord for each fork and running away from toxicity is such cope, I think that's a little bit cynical, man. There are people in the Discord that are just miserable fucks, they suck. And I don't have any interest in engaging with those people whatsoever. So it's we can just let them keep talking and yabbering and talking shit. But I find it to be quite cancerous. So it's I don't think I don't think that the idea is necessarily, you need to make a new Discord for every fork. But I certainly think that at this point, forking the Discord, I don't want to come in and say let's just start banning people from the current Discord. I feel like that's one of the principles of the way this community has been set up, and I don't necessarily want to change it at this point. I don't even know how we would go about changing that. But it's if you set up a new Discord from scratch, I think it's much more reasonable to have new rules. So that's, I don't think it's running away. I'm just not engaging.
I mean, on this end, I am cautiously optimistic that given the nature of forks that can only be upgraded by people opting into them, that it does create a different dynamic where people feel like, votes and upgrades are being passed without their consent to some extent. I mean, it really feels like there are people around that, are still groaning that any budget ever passed, starting 3 years ago. And it's hard to imagine that being the case when it's not possible. All right. Najek also asks, do you think that forking and trying many different environments will make you less rigorous in thinking about what is correct economically?
No, I don't think so. Like this is going to give a lot more data. Frankly, I feel like it's been very hard to think rigorously about Beanstalk given the lack of data. So personally, this is not a large concern of mine. Would you read Jay's message right above that?
Jay says, truly shattering that after all of this, just forking and not accounting for all that has gone into this and all the capital we have tied up into the current protocol is the route. Within a month, all of the resources that went into this are just gone. This almost feels worse than the exploit itself. Realize that it is not that simple, but really demoralizing that a fork is the route.
I want to acknowledge this perspective, and in some ways, it is really demoralizing. Like we put a lot of chips on making this version work, and it has not worked. And like cutting those losses feels really horrible. It's like sawing off a limb, and I really do want to acknowledge like I also feel immense pain about this. But at the same time, we cannot let our past mistakes or our current predicament prevent moving forward. And I think at this point, the question becomes not whether or not to move forward, but instead how to move forward in a way that does both put Beanstalk in a much, much better position to succeed moving forward and try to honor everything that has gone into Beanstalk to date, which is an immense amount of time, energy, effort, money, love, passion. Like, yeah, this one really hurts. And I, just want to say, like, a big reason why we put out the article in the first place is because I don't think that this is a decision that can be taken lightly. In fact, this is a decision that was taken quite heavily. And I feel as though it's like our obligation, having made a very tough decision like this, to share with all of you guys who I do feel like deserve that, to know why we're doing what we're doing. And I think, unfortunately, one thing that was not made clear in the letter was that, we're not, at least personally, I'm not inclined at all to just forget about what's gone on so far and forget about the existing participants. This really sucks, And to some extent, you're right, Jay. Like, it does almost feel worse than the exploit insofar as like the exploit just happened and everything was going so great. And it was sort of like a crashing back to reality. Whereas this is ugly, This is like a declaration of failure. Whereas in response to the hack, it's like, there was that felt more like a crisis that hit everyone and we were able to unify around, which is very meaningful. Whereas this feels very harsh in the sense of like, this is a real failure or an acknowledgement of failure that is more permanent. Yeah. So I wanted to take a moment to acknowledge your comments.
I think the next question is also from Jay. They say, still not sure how it is in the best interest for all of those holding the current protocol's assets. Can you elaborate now or in the near future about how all of those in the original Beanstalk will be converted to the fork or what will happen, unless this is spelled out already?
Yeah, I don't think today I can do that. I don't think any of those plans have been finalized. But like I said, within a month, I would expect some plan to be published.
Jack asks, is there going to be a new UI update with the rebrand? Is this all going to run on app.bean.money or will they all have separate sites?
Time will tell, my friend. Time will tell, at least with respect to the rebrand. Is this all going to run on app.bean.money? I don't think so. I think that would probably be inappropriate, but I don't know.
I think we might be through them all. If I missed your question, please shout. All right, Jay says, Ben and Guy, you both know FERT was bold. The barn race was such a strong reflection of the integrity of not defaulting on debt. No, you don't want to be seen as the founder, so to speak, but you are. As such, please know we have a lot of trust in you that will continue to lead with that kind of integrity with whatever happens going forward.
Thank you, Jay.
Awesome. Well, if nothing else, maybe I'll give it another 20 seconds, see if anyone wants to post anything else. Nasdaq asks, will you do more classes after this? After how this went?
TBD. Like I said, I think maybe having a different strategy on communication going forward is a good idea. I kind of like the idea of, we will participate for 3 months and then we're going dark. I like something like that. So we'll see. I miss class. I miss talking with y'all about Beanstalk. I love these questions. Like, we just did 2 hours and change, and I'm ready to go for 2 more hours. This is my favorite. This is my favorite shit to talk about. So yeah, I don't know. We'll see.
I love talking about this stuff too. All right. Well, thanks everyone for coming. Best attendance we've got in months. And thank you, Ben. This was great.
Cheers, y'all. Peace out.
Take care, everyone. See ya.